Today's discussion will be presented in 3 sections since we are recording it for a radio broadcast on Federal News Network. You're welcome to post questions and comments during the session and we'll try to answer them online. I'd like to introduce our moderator, Jason Miller, the Executive Editor of Federal News Network.
Welcome to the discussion. My guests today are Bob Costello, the Chief Information Officer for the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency at the Homeland Security Department, Bo Hauser, the Chief Information Security Officer at the Census Bureau at the Commerce Department, Larry Kiger, the Executive Security Advisor of the Worldwide Public Sector at Amazon Web Services, and Sean Frazier, the Federal Chief Security Officer at Okta. Let me set just a little context for our discussion today. It has been clear since the term zero trust first landed in the federal sector that ensuring the identity of the user is central to implementation. CISA called identity in the zero trust maturity model that agencies must move away from simply using passwords to validate identity and instead use a combination of factors to validate and continuously verify that identity throughout the duration of the interactions with services and data. The challenge, of course, is agencies have been working on identity and access management for the better part of 20 years. So if the build-up to this zero trust mandate, we saw OMB and the National Institute of Standards and Technology update key policy memos and technical guidance. They address new challenges and opportunities to manage identity and access management, like cloud, robotics process automation, and managing a hybrid environment where some applications live in the cloud and others will live on-premise data centers. So as agencies take advantage of new policies, technical guidance, and of course the innovations coming from the federal sector, they have to evaluate and remap their plan to strengthen and expand IDAM, Identity and Access Management. Among the questions that emerge is how to move into microsegmentation architecture to protect systems and data. What is the data you're trying to protect and at what impact level? And how to balance security with ease of use. To answer many of those questions, well, that's where our panels are going to come in. Let me start with Bo Hauser, Identity and Access Management, Zero Trust. How are you incorporating those two things at the Census Bureau?
Hey, thank you, Jason. Thanks for having me, and thanks for this conversation. I think this is very timely, and hopefully helps us sort of work through some of the changes that many agencies are dealing with. We're certainly dealing with those changes at the Census Bureau, and we're wrestling with what this future state looks like under a zero trust model. We've done some things in the past that absolutely fall in line with zero trust principles. One example of that is for the 2020 census. Obviously, that was a large operation, and we had about 500,000 devices deployed across the country when we were working through the door-to-door phase of that operation. On those devices, we put a certificate, right? And that was a critical piece of our security approach at the time. And the point there being, under zero trust, the user identity and the device identity are both critical to getting that right. And so, we're trying to think about how that looks. Agencies often view the identity as just the person, right? It's not. You can't limit it to that. So you got to have the person identity, and you got to have the confidence level with that person identity combined with the device identity and an associated confidence level of that device. And then that confidence level, among other things that I'm sure we'll talk about today, feeds into what you allow the device and the user to do in your network. And so we did that from a device standpoint for the 2020 census. Obviously, we had other things working in the background as well for device compliance and so on and so forth. But having that strong certificate-based identity on the device definitely helped us to leverage some of the zero trust principles in that operation, and it was very helpful. Going forward, we have major IT initiatives. We're sort of transforming from an IT perspective, right? So our goal is to create the future state of IT at the Census Bureau, and so we're working now on an enterprise survey system. And so as we are implementing that system, we're incorporating the zero trust principles natively, inherently, using some of the lessons learned that we've already used, and plus maximizing things like our cloud capabilities. AWS is a key partner in this initiative, and so we certainly want to also embrace our cloud migration as part of this transformation, right? So you've got cloud, you've got zero trust, you've got SASE. SASE is the replacement for traditional VPN. all these components sort of come together to give you many, many more tools in your toolbox to leverage, to be very surgical with the access and then continuous with the access. And so we're certainly, like I said, in the figuring it out phase, but I'm happy to continue to share what we're doing, what we figure out, what works, what doesn't work, as we move forward.
But what's the big lesson maybe you learned from that 2020 census, connecting the device to the person that you're applying going forward? I mean, the 2030 census is, 8 years away, but you're already planning for it now. And for instance, with this other modernization efforts you mentioned around the enterprise survey system, how are you applying some of those lessons going forward?
Well, I found generally that there's a perception that zero trust is very, very strict and very rigid. It certainly can be, but you can also look at the zero trust approach as being extremely flexible, right? So where traditionally you've been very limited and you've used role-based access control, right? That's been sort of the historical model with perimeter-based approaches. Now we're able to say, if you're the right user to a certain confidence level, and if you're the right device, and if your network attributes are what we expect, right? You're coming from the location we expect, and your compliance status of your device is what we expect, then even if that is a low confidence level, we can allow you some level of access, but maybe restrict the functionality within your session, right? So it's extremely flexible if you look at it from that perspective.
All right.
But much more sophisticated, right? With that complexity and that flexibility comes sophistication too. So it's sort of a trade-off there.
All right. Well, plenty more to dig into. I'm sure we'll get to it. Let's turn to Bob from CISA. Bob, from CISA's perspective, when it comes to, we all think about CISA zero trust from the work your colleagues do with the maturity model and the CDM program. You're looking at, though, internally, how do you ensure that internal employees of CISA are meeting goals of zero trust? Walk me through that and your focus on identity and access management.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you, Jason, because it is a bit of a challenge. Here at CISA, we're doing a lot of the documentation and guidance around zero trust, and we have to follow it ourselves. Also being, the newest federal agency, when we came out of DHS headquarters about 3 years ago, I kind of inherited a lot of technical debt. I have a lot of, legacy systems. I'm getting support from a lot of different areas. So one of the first areas is I work with the CDM program and other programs here at CISA, just like any other CIO across government. We're following the zero trust maturity model. I'm working with the CDM program for services that I might need. And I think that's something, when we talk about the messaging of CISA, we want to get that out there. CISA is here to help. We absolutely understand that agencies have a big challenge in front of them. To your point, we've been doing this identity and access management work, maybe even longer, for 20 years. I remember doing it, in the 90s at a much different level. But, we've been doing this, to your point, a long time. We understand agencies have tech debt. We are absolutely here to help and advise. I think that we're putting out some really great products around that. Also, Bo mentioned some, SASE and a few other initiatives. Our SCUBA initiative that is out for public comment right now is an absolutely fabulous foray into securing, Microsoft 365 environments and then moving on to Google G Suite environments. I think for me here internally at CISA, some of it is simplification. It doesn't work when you have 20 identity sources of truth, or people are logging into one system one way, the next system with another way. So one of the things I'm looking at is how can I start provide enterprise services from the office of the CIO here at CISA? We're going to provide an identity service. We're going to provide that SSO. We're going to provide a lot of the zero trust solutionings, remote access, and elsewhere. So my role won't be to develop those mission systems that are happening in the cybersecurity area, but I want to provide that strong foundation that people can build off of. One of the other areas that we're concentrating on is how do we ensure that, I'm providing really great services to CISA operators. Bo hit on that really hard. We have a lot of customers, obviously here. I have a very technical workforce. So it's very hard at times being the CIO of CISA because everyone does IT here. So one of my other goals is, and Bo hit this on, Zero Trust doesn't have to be this inflexible, no one can do anything. You can make it really smooth. I want to ensure that we are deploying the best IT possible so that people are like, you know what, CISA is just like a startup. Just like when I work at a big, private sector company, you're getting great technology, you're having ease of access to systems, but also with a very high level of security, logging, proofing, everything that goes into that. And we're also going to continue to be here. I'm a big subscriber of CISA services. That is very important. We're going to be using those services to modernize CISA itself.
Bob, just a quick follow-up. I want to make sure, it always kind of attracts me a little bit when someone says we have 20 different ID sourcing sources of truth. I don't know if 20 was just your number that you kind of said, we have way too many in 20, or do you actually have 20? I had to ask that question.
Well, we do have a lot of our legacy applications that are maybe doing it themselves or using different providers, some of them quite advanced, which is, perfectly fine. I can always go back to, people know I've been at DHS for a while with that short stint in the private sector for a little bit of time before I came back. But it was a challenge in my last role elsewhere in the department. I believe in the software development shop I was running, we had 3 separate, identity solutions. And then we had the enterprise identity solution. Then we had other offerings from the department. So 20 was kind of a number I picked out. But it's also, the way CISA was formed as a headquarters element, the way things were done, a lot of our systems are, doing very good things, but maybe not able to consume enterprise services because we're still building those out.
All right, 20 is just that's you hear a number like that and you're like, oh wow, which actually is a great segue because I can turn to Sean and say, Sean, 20 different systems, whether it's 20 or 15 or 8, is that common? I mean, is that what you're seeing when as agencies are moving and talking about their zero trust? Okay, first of all, we need to federate or consolidate. What are you seeing?
So I think that number is actually low. I think most people I talk to have way more than 20, and the reason is because, and Bo kind of hit on this in the beginning, we built this long tail of legacy stuff, right? So if you stood up an agency IT infrastructure for 50 years ago, you got 50 years of legacy. And what ended up happening was, identity ended up not being thought of as kind of a security construct as much as just the thing that came along with the application to let people log into it. So every time you bought an application, you got an identity provider with it. So you deployed 40 applications or 50 applications, you had 40 different identity providers, and there wasn't really a concept in the beginning of this of kind of single sign-on and how do I provide kind of secure single way to get access to this. As we think about identity now, we now look at identity as critical infrastructure, right? So identity is critical to get access to the applications. It also is the most attractive front door for attackers for obvious reasons. It behooves us, and it's one of the reasons why some of the guidance has come out of CISA and out of OMB has been, get your single sign-on security house in order, move to a common, enterprise architecture, as Bo pointed out, right? A service that you provide to your organization that is secure. You're doing all the right, blocking and tackling on multi-factor authentication. You've got secure single sign-on. You're plugging all your applications into this. The device context, as Bo pointed out, is also key. Making sure the device is in good stead, user in good stead. You can kind of do that at wire speed when users request things. But yeah, we're in the middle of this. It's an exciting time of consolidation and bring that to the fore because identity is critical infrastructure now.
I want to bring in Larry real quick because I think the single sign-on piece that Sean referred to is something that obviously AWS, a lot of cloud providers are starting really to provide. And I know AWS is partnering with Okta to provide that service, I would guess. But Larry, maybe jump in here and talk about that single sign-on piece and why is it a big challenge for a lot of agencies with this hybrid world that they live in?
Yeah, that's a good point, and thanks a lot, Jason, for adding me to obviously that discussion because that's something that's really key for us as well as we start looking at our federal customers and our partners that are out there like Okta. we do offer our single sign-on. There is a single sign-on service, and for the most part, it has a lot. It's very broad, right? You can take a lot of different pieces and parts and move it all into one, and give you kind of access into our CLI or our, kind of a, I like to call it the nerd screen, right? When we go in behind the cloud and things of that nature. I think there's a lot of different things that we're looking at from, not just identity and access management, but how do we protect those types of people? We're looking at, solutions that are based on like companies like Okta, our partners, and things of that nature that are providing that service to us, and how can we kind of harmonize across the different areas. The other areas that we're looking at is, and one thing that we've done kind of from the very beginning is, when somebody utilizes single sign-on, we have the ability to control exactly that pinpoint area where they can actually come in and what services they can utilize and how they can utilize it, and through our service control policies and things of that nature, and even to the point where we can say, hey, look, I have a user named Larry, who would be myself, right? Because I also use our services as well, and I think if I were to lock that down, I could say, well, Larry, you can. I like to use analogies, so pardon my analogies here. You can come into my front living room, right? But before you come in, I'm gonna ask you a bunch of questions before I even let you in that front door. And from a the perspective of that, we are trying to apply those policies and things of that nature to leverage what and who you are first, right? Through a lot of different pieces, right? So we're looking at, on top of the single sign-on, do you have things like multi-factor authentication or certificates that maybe could identify you going forward? And also what, once you come in to my front door, or once you get into the cloud, right? Well, I'm asking you things like, really, where do you need to go? Do you just need to stay in the foyer? Or can I let you come in and sit on my couch, right? Or, in this case, do you need access into KMS, right, our key management system? Or are you somebody that just really is more along the lines of a standard user that would never really need to have access into our key management systems, right? And that is in itself a really huge asset as we go forward into our identity journeys.
All right, Larry, you opened the door for our next part of our conversation. You see how I fit that in? We're going to take a quick break. We'll come back. We will jump into your living room and maybe even eat your food in your kitchen. You're listening to the panel discussion, Adopting a Zero Trust Security Model, sponsored by Okta on Federal News Network.